Uber and Lyft drivers go on strike, Saudi Arabia has an app that lets you track your wife, and Facebook gets subpoenaed by Canada. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. If you were wondering why when you open your Uber app there were so few drivers available today, I'll explain that to you via this first story. In a protest against poverty, wages, and exploitation, Uber and Lyft drivers go on strike across the globe. It's funny enough, Uber was set to make a massive IPO in the coming days, so their workforce chose a golden time to strike against them. Try and bring that value down. That's a way to get them moving. When you play with a company's money, they take action. Well, sometimes not in your favor, but they will do something. Drivers were growing frustrated by the low wages they faced, and that was compounded by a lack of worker rights and benefits. At the same time, they saw Uber CEOs taking home millions and the company's valuation rising to the billions of dollars. They felt they helped build the company, so they wanted a share of the pie. At the very least, they wanted Uber to provide them with a living wage and to answer to their concerns, not just with the intentions of pleasing shareholders, but genuinely acting in the best interest of their quote-unquote employees, because that itself is debatable, whether or not these drivers are employees of Uber or simply just contract workers, but we'll get to that in just a second. Interviews with strikers display the general sentiments that they're trying to make ends meet in their personal lives, but the platform isn't positioned in a fair way for that. It's actually posing a lot of obstacles for them to get paid, and many drivers are struggling to get through their day-to-day lifestyles. Technically, they're not considered full-time employees, so benefits aren't even on the table because they aren't mandated by law, and they're also complaining that their earnings have been stagnant despite the increase in Uber and Lyft's popularity. Drivers from the United States to Canada to even Nigeria and beyond are all banding together to show support. It's a united strike from all these drivers, and I have a lot of thoughts about that. I'll start by saying this. A strike is a golden opportunity for drivers who are not involved in the strike to rake in a couple of extra dollars, and that's why it's so crucial that when you perform something like this, you have as many people as possible to make it as effective as possible. So, first of all, taxi companies who are slaughtered at the hands of Uber are having a field day. Uber and Lyft drivers are calling a strike, so what options do you have? Public transit, you drive yourself, or back to the good old days and you get a taxi. So they're making money hand over fist as the requests are piling up, and on top of that, some Uber drivers didn't want to take part in the strike, and now they have an open field to themselves because a lot of drivers are taking the part. So less drivers, same supply, more money for you. AKA, it's not really going in the way that they had thought. They wanted to cripple the companies, but that hasn't been the result per se. Now, in relation to the grievances the drivers have against Uber, I really hear these people. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, I don't think Uber was ever meant to provide work for full-time drivers. It wasn't supposed to be your sole source of income. They deliberately have you operating as a former freelancer to avoid paying benefits, and it also reduces the amount of employee rights that you are entitled to. But that was all part of the formula since day one. The original conception of Uber was to have it supplement your income like a side hustle. It's not sustainable to view Uber as a primary means of stability for your life. It's not what it was intended to do, and it's not going to do that. What are the odds that Uber pays these people more and takes care of their health and dental needs? I'd say the likelihood of that is pretty close to zero. They really have no incentive to do this, especially with self-driving cars on the horizon, but I'll touch on that in just a second. But first I want to address what's been coined the gig economy. It's a phenomenon where people go from gig to gig without a steady flow of income or job security, hence the title. You have Uber, Lyft, freelancing, Fiverr, and all these other methods for earning money on the side, but it's placed a massive stress on people. It's in the name. They're gigs. You're living from project to project without any form of safety net or reassurance. People can't get meaningful full-time jobs, so they have to resort to these methods to make a living, but they were never designed to do that in the first place. It's a flaw. Then you also have people who have full-time jobs, but at the same time, they can't make ends meet, so they need another job to supplement that income on the side. It's more a forced reality and not a conscious decision that they're making. They have to do it. That's also another flaw of our current economy. This entire situation skews the unemployment rates we see. Being an Uber driver will enable you to declare that you are technically working and employed, but it's not meaningful labor. So if we really dive into the numbers, we might be facing a pseudo unemployment crisis all of its own. If you have a growing portion of your populace resorting to these types of jobs but unemployment is going up, it's not a good thing necessarily, and it can be indicative of a larger issue. Now you layer on the fact that the qualifications to become an Uber driver in the first place aren't even all that high, so the supply of drivers is ever growing, and that creates downward pressures on wages like with most low-skilled laborers. Being in that type of bracket also makes you more susceptible to being replaced by technology, especially in today's world. Your bargaining power is heavily hindered. Uber really doesn't have to deal with you because they can wait a couple years and just have self-driving cars, get rid of the entire human element, and not have to deal with your wage requests anymore. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the situation here. That concept ties into where I think things can backfire hard for the protesters. Uber does not want to increase their expenses by paying people more. Instead of upping their payroll budget, which would affect them from now until the end of time, it serves them better in the long run to invest into self-driving cars to get those on the road faster. Tesla has already come very far, and they're on the precipice of already launching these vehicles. It's right here and it's knocking on our doors. This is coming up really soon. It's a similar argument you can make with minimum wages jumping higher. It comes with an equilibrium point, and after that, alternatives become more attractive. Look at McDonald's or Loblaws or any Walmart even. Low-skill labor gets replaced by machinery when machinery becomes way more attractive. You can have $20 as the minimum wage and it sounds amazing, but it's not that simple. This is where politicians always get you. You need to look deeper than that because they're empty promises and they come with backlashes. That's not to say there should be zero regulations, but companies are in the business of making profit and they will adapt to their environment. Sometimes the change won't be in your favor. You can have one person now who makes $15 being a cashier clerk instead of an entire crew that makes $10. That one person can preside over an entire fleet of automated cash outs. It's been replaced because that was the alternative, that's where the money led, and that's what improved their bottom line the most. Of course, these changes were always going to happen, but it's a question of how fast you can spur the company's urgency to implement them. Right now, Uber says it's not economically feasible to get these cars on the road immediately, but by increasing your wages and making them pay more, it becomes more and more economically feasible. The dynamite stick is shortening, and it's at the expense of the drivers. It seems it's almost like a paradox. Obviously, you want to get paid more, you want better benefits, but you're putting the longevity of your job, and for a lot of people, their careers on the line because of that. It's really a lose-lose situation, and I'm not too sure there's an easy way out of it. The key here isn't forcing Uber to pay more, or even trying to rely on Uber as a primary means of income. Education and expanding employment opportunities into budding industries, making it easier for Canadians to achieve meaningful labor, giving them the tools to succeed is what we need to do. It's a grassroots change, and that's what's needed here. If that's not possible, the notion of a universal basic income also becomes highly attractive, and I'm of the belief that we're going to need something like that when technology reaches its climax. But forcing Uber to pay more, it's all just band-aids and it's temporary fixes to long-term problems. Both of these approaches, though, such as increasing education and getting more opportunities for meaningful labor, on top of the side conversation of a UBI, those are more practical and productive approaches to solving the situation that aren't simply short-sighted, and they might make a change that is sustainable into the future. So that's my 2 cents on the whole Uber strike situation. Let's move on to Saudi Arabia. They've come under fire for a wife tracking app. How crazy is that? A Human Rights Watch researcher reports that the Saudi Arabia government allows male guardians and employers to trap women and migrants in the country. One way they do that is with a government app that can be used by men to control the movements of women. It restricts their travel and keeps them controlled. If you want to discuss human rights, this is an undeniable example of that. These are the things feminists must focus their attention on. Actual examples of injustice. We tend to forget that other parts of the world are still trapped in the Stone Ages because of how advanced our current surroundings are in North America. Things are vastly different in other parts of the world, and that requires looking at. They have it probably about 1,000 times worse over there, so maybe give them some attention. On top of all that, the report shows a link between this app and an increase in domestic violence and abusive labor conditions. Wow, shocker, who could have seen that coming? So just to give you an idea of how entirely messed up this is, you can hop onto the Saudi Arabia Google Store or iTunes and just download the app onto your phone. It's been downloaded more than 1 million times. That's a lot of domestic slaves because that's what they're being treated as. If the woman tries to flee, you can get a text message that they are trying to use their passports. Massive invasion of privacy and just downright creepy on so many levels. The Saudi regime labels this as a male guardianship system. It's really a euphemism for complete control. Guardianship is probably the last thing this app permits. It's a means of complete subjugation and reducing another human being to a literal possession. Not what happens in North America when someone makes a joke about you. This is real, and this is an injustice. So that's not even the worst of it all. Women are treated as legal minors under the law, and they cannot marry, divorce, travel, get a job, be released from prison, or have elective surgery without permissions from their male guardians. If that doesn't get you angry, I'm not too sure what will. The entire list is sickening, but I want to focus on the divorce aspect. You really need your male guardian's approval to divorce him? Yeah, right, like that's ever going to happen. It's like me saying I need my kidnapper's approval to run away from them. In other words, it's a trap that ensures you have no escape from your current situation. The only time you get granted the escape is if you've become a burden to your male guardian and they treat you as a nuisance. They'd be better off without you, so they pass you on to a new male guardian because apparently you need one. You're incapable of making your own decisions. The article, provided by The Independent, criticizes app platforms like Apple and Google for even allowing things like this onto their store. They shouldn't exist within their ecosystem, and I agree with that notion. They really need to revise their terms and conditions. They're actively enabling the Saudi government and its citizens to distribute a tool used to suppress women in a backwards part of the world. Without a question, money is a factor here. You can bet your life savings that they've paid off Google and Apple to have these apps registered, because I don't feel like Apple or Google would put their necks out there unless they were being properly compensated. The money aspect definitely complicates things, but this is such a vile idea. The company should have the courage to turn it down. Whatever or whoever approved this arrangement can't possibly have a clean conscience. The CEOs of these companies need to get called out and held accountable for their decisions. This is a cause worth petitioning about. But then again, this is probably just another band-aid, because even without these tech giants, Saudi will find a way to spread their app. It's inevitable. It's really a humanitarian issue that needs grassroots changes. Denouncing their practices publicly is the first step to achieving that, though. Regardless of if you're a feminist or not, this case, we should all be able to condemn it because it's just so evil. Women deserve equal rights, and it's a fact that under the law, in Canada and the United States, women do have the same rights as men. But, as I've said, in other parts of the world, that's clearly not the same standard that people live by, and it has to change. We live in the 21st century. There really is no place for this barbaric type of control of another person anymore. It's unacceptable, and it shows that our current focus is not in the right place. It's not where it has to be. This is not something we can fix overnight. It will be a long process, but we might as well start now. So I'll update you on the latest from Saudi Arabia. They're always getting caught up in the news for something crazy. This is just another drop in the bucket. I wonder when it's going to overflow and we realize something really has to be done. So moving on to our final article of the day. A Canadian's Ethic Committee votes to subpoena Mark Zuckerberg in relation to Cambridge Analytica. Yesterday, a motion was passed to issue a subpoena to Mark to testify before an international committee about the spread of misinformation and the Cambridge scandal. So for those of you who didn't know, a subpoena is essentially a summons that orders someone to attend court. We're calling out Mark and telling him to come through. This isn't the first time Facebook has been instructed to testify before a panel, but we can only hope it's not as ridiculous as the clown show that his appearance before Congress was. If you missed that, trust me, it's painful to watch and you probably want to save your sanity. It was a bunch of old people who have zero idea about tech asking a tech giant about data. Mark wiped the floor with them, and because of how simple and naive the questioning was, it was easy. One Congress member didn't even know how Facebook made money. He was bewildered as to how a free platform can continue to exist. Well, it's something called data. Look it up. Advertising. Data is the reason why he's testifying in the first place. It was a major facepalm. Maybe prep for these questioning periods, or better yet, have someone with actual expertise and skill become parts of the panel. Now, is Facebook a slimy company that likes to play around with your data and personal information? You bet. 100%, there's no doubt about that. The other question, are we ever going to be able to hold them accountable? That's not so certain, and it's really still up in the air. This Canadian subpoena itself has limited effects on Mark. He can simply not respond to it. He's not a Canadian citizen, and he doesn't live here. We could give him the Huawei treatment and force an extradition, but that's probably a little bit extreme and will come with major backlash. So Zuckerberg can just stay in the States and continue living life. We don't have the authority to force him to cross over. If he ever crosses the border though into Canada, then he'd be screwed. We can take him into custody and force him into the hearing. It would be the funniest thing ever if maybe 20 years down the road he forgets he has the subpoena and he crosses over to see Niagara Falls or something from the other side, then boom, the Mounties get him and he's immediately captured. One important thing to note here is that Facebook is not the only tech company that the panel wants to question. Invitations have gone to Twitter, Google, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. I'm not too sure what they expected by giving them an invite. Then you have Amazon, Apple, and more. My opinion is that we should hold these companies to a certain standard, and getting them to testify is fine, but how many of these trials do we need? What are they even trying to accomplish? It's pretty clear to me exactly what Facebook is, and their practices haven't been a secret for a long time now. One of my fears is the government looking to seize these social channels. We already had a Canadian official proposing the idea of controlling social media to avoid election interference. That's so ironic because that would be the way to open the gate to the highest possible election interference out there. Having the government control it, that's a terrible idea. Like it or not, these have become our primary means of communication and they must remain independent. At the same time, we deserve to know what's going on with our data and protections must be in place. It's a fine line between government regulation and freedom. Striking a balance is key here, and if having more meetings helps them to get that, then have at it. Mark just might not show up because he doesn't have to, so be prepared for that. And if he does show up, at least make some notes and don't ask any more silly questions because, I don't know, it seems like a waste of time. Have some experts in the room and really get to the crux of the situation. This Cambridge thing is so old, but everyone is still bewildered in the government. That's definitely a sign that things have to change. I feel like another key way that we can improve the situation is for us, the citizens, to start putting more pressure on the government and Facebook. To Facebook, we are their customers. To the government, we are the voters. Both of their livelihoods and careers and sustainability relies directly on us. I think there's some blame to put on the consumer. How many headlines do you read week after week of the latest Facebook data breach, Facebook selling your data, Facebook doing whatever, providing misinformation about political campaigns? It's nonstop and it keeps piling on. Maybe there's an element of you becoming desensitized to it because of how often it occurs, but that's not how we have to approach things. We need to put on the pressure so Facebook, first of all, holds themselves accountable, and on top of that, the government begins to move, because if they don't, they won't get voted back in. Facebook is taking advantage of a nonchalant crowd here. Your data is important, so start acting like it. If Facebook was robbing you for $10 or $20 even, you would be up in arms. Why aren't we acting that way when they're robbing our data? Data is key, and as the future continues to evolve, it's going to be what leads to Facebook continuing their dominance over social media. If your privacy means nothing, then sit idly by. But if you want to stand up for that, then you have to get involved. So before our show ends today, I just want to give myself a quick plug. If you enjoy our content, it would be greatly appreciated if you could leave a review. It really helps us in the rankings and it spreads the word of our podcast. So hop onto Apple or whatever platform you use, leave a comment, a review, or share. I'm trying to get my numbers out there so we could educate and get people to really think more about how they're consuming data and just learning about Canada and other places as well. So that about does it for today. If you want to keep up with me, follow me on Twitter at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.